mentioned Lloyd's, and obviously we're going to now have to bring the Lloyd's banking and some of the past experiences into our conversation. So obviously before the sector, you were working in, I would say, corporate sort of environment, in a corporate place. So talk to us a little bit about the journey here, and obviously, you mentioned Lloyd's Bank, but there's also other organisations you worked with. So corporate life, what was it like?
What was it like?
That transition.
It was like accidental at university. I was thinking about how I got into that, and actually I did go to university. I got a degree in journalism. And I thought I wanted to be a journalist. I've a couple of bad experiences with work experience put me off. Oh, really? And actually came out of university not knowing what I wanted to do. Had the BBC offered apprenticeships at the point of that, I would have definitely applied for one of those. They look fantastic, don't they? But I actually went to a couple of recruitment agencies. I moved to Wales from London. And I went to a couple of recruitment agencies, and they're like, why don't you come and work for us? So I did. And that's how I started out life, as a resourcer, really. And one of the best roles that I had was working for a small organisation. They managed the recruitment for large organisations. And I got into working for Halifax Bank of Scotland at the time to manage an IT project.
Okay.
And that was, I suppose, my first in-house recruiter role. They had 60 vacancies. This shows my age, Saf, but we put an advert in the paper. We got 2,000 CVs in paper. And we had to interview everybody that was going to join this organisation. And anyone who works in resourcing knows you put 3 or 4 candidates forward for a role. Well, in this environment, they tasked us with finding the one. So it was like a 1-to-1 ratio. And I love that. I love the pace of it. I loved the breadth of it. I loved being in a position where we were doing something that I could see would support the organisation. So that's how I suppose I first landed in corporate world in a role I really enjoyed, and sort of went up through the ranks in terms of recruitment. I think probably a low point then was in 2008 when there was the financial crash. And I had my daughter that year, and I was sat at home feeding her, watched on the news, and Halifax Bank of Scotland had collapsed, right? So I was like, oh my goodness, I was like 9 months into maternity leave, just due to go back. And that's when Lloyd's TSB took over, and it became Lloyd's Banking Group. And that's how I went into Lloyd's. I was an ex-Halifax Bank of Scotland person, which was probably, if I have to look back at my career in banking, that was probably the best and the worst time, if that made sense, because you went from a huge organisation, and I worked in the retail banking, so your credit cards, your loans and all the other bits and pieces. Huge organisation, what was 85,000, it had to come down because you had a duplication of roles, right? So I worked in the part of the bank that was responsible for the new organisational design. Once it had taken over Halifax Bank of Scotland, what did each department look like? How would people going to be selected into it? How are they going to be redeployed if they didn't have a role? How would they exit the organisation? I say it was the best and worst time because it was the worst. Clearly, people were leaving. The whole organisation was up in the air. It was a big change. But the best because I worked with an incredible team to select thousands of people into roles, and we smashed our redeployment targets. And, it was just incredible effort. It was the hardest because it was the most hours I'd ever worked. We were in front of trade unions at silly o'clock in the morning, talking about plans. But I think in terms of how it stood me up for the next stage of my career, I often sort of refer to it as like army training in the corporate world. It was very rigorous.
Canny Conversation Podcast Series 5 by Safaraz Ali.